Hello and welcome to our first session of the HR Summit of OpenUp. Today we will be diving into the topic of why investing in HR and well-being should be a part of every company's growth strategy in 2024. At OpenUp, we envision a world where mental well-being is recognized as a top priority and is supported in the workplace. We believe in empowering and enabling people to make mental well-being a top priority by sharing lessons learned and experiences to help you to make mental well-being a top priority and make those positive and sustainable changes. Our aim of today's summit is to inspire you on these topics. My name is Emma White. I am a psychologist here at OpenUp. And today I'm joined in the studio by the lovely Marta de Monteseco Romero, who is head of people at OpenUp. I'm joined by James Lewis, who is head of sustainability or human sustainability leader at Deloitte, and joined online by Martin Silvester, global workplace director at Arcadis. A very warm welcome to the three of you. We're very happy for you to be here. I'm very excited, and that's why I think we should just dive straight into it. And I'm going to give the first question to Martin. Can you give an example of a specific action or project within your company where investments in employee well-being clearly led to positive developments or successes?
Hi, Emma, and hi, everyone. Thanks very much for inviting me to talk today. So for Arcadis, we've been on a global workplace transformation journey now for around 3.5 years, something like that, where we've taken a look at our whole workplace offering to our people to really understand what benefits both physical assets can bring to people's well-being in the workplace, but also their work style. So for us, it's been very much kind of a twofold activity. One is, as I said, is getting the physical assets right. So we've invested a lot in our portfolio to create spaces that give people opportunities to do different things, to work in different ways. So lots of focus on collaboration, lots of focus on decompression spaces as well, and a real engagement with our neurodiversity groups at Arcadis, of which we've got a whole work stream set up around that to really understand what different environments do for different people and how they can interact with those physical environments. Alongside that, we've also been rolling out a hybrid work style model, which has been very successful and really introducing an element of choice into how people work and also where they work. So whether that be remote, whether that's with clients, whether that's in the Arcadis offices, has really put that emphasis on looking at the employee and what the employee wants and how that drives benefit to the overall organisation. So yeah, a really quite involved programme for us with well-being of our people very, very much at the heart of it.
Sounds like a real 360 approach. And I'm curious, do you use any of these offerings yourself?
Yeah, very much. I mean, I've got a global role, so I split my time between offices both in the UK but also internationally, and I tend to try and work in different environments. So today I'm at home, tomorrow I may be in a co-working space towards the middle of the week, hopefully with some of our client service delivery teams, and then probably back at home again at the weekend. Now, for me, that works very, very well, but what we recognise is that doesn't work well for everybody. Some people need that face-to-face environment, day in, day out again, and I think we may talk about it a little bit later. Different generations have different requirements, different stages of their career will have different environments as well that they need, and different connectivity. Early years careers for us is a real kind of key area. You're just coming into the industry, we're a professional services firm. You're just coming in, you need to build those social networks as well. So we recognise that a remote model for us as a professional services firm just would not work. Well-being was significantly impacted in a number of our people during the pandemic. I don't want to kind of keep talking about the pandemic. Everybody keeps referring back to it as a point, but it was quite of a real learning point for workplace professionals in understanding what the impact of remote work, hybrid work, and then the return to office would actually mean around well-being. And we've certainly learned a lot from that. But yeah, I try and live the values that we deliver as an organisation by flexing where I and how I work.
Thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like you're really trying to meet people where they're at, whatever point in their career or what they need during work, and also applying that to yourself. So really nice to hear that. Thank you for sharing. James, is there anything that you'd like to add on this question of specific actions or projects that have led to positive outcomes in your company regarding well-being?
I mean, I've got an externally facing role, so it's quite a nice balance, I guess, to Martin, who's internally facing. I get to see a lot of what some of our clients are doing around the world. And I think one of the things, Martin, you've just mentioned is around sort of what do people want? And one of the things we've seen that has been most beneficial to our clients is very much understanding 4 dimensions: needs, interests, concerns, expectations, because they tend to identify some of the root causes of things that affect well-being and create almost ill-being within an organisation. Typically where organisations have just perhaps thrown a range of benefit solutions at a workforce. For example, here is an app that you can use to help build personal resilience. Whereas actually, the reason they've done that is because lots of people have started to get burnt out. And that doesn't address the root cause of the burnout, which could be a 16-hour working day, or it could be sort of drivers from leadership asking people, or sort of subconsciously driving people to want to do over and above what perhaps they would normally be able to do in their sort of capacity. So taking that approach of looking across needs, interests, concerns, expectations, creating, Martin, it sounds like you've done something similar, some personas almost, to say these are the handful of groups. You know, it could be sort of women of a certain age with a certain background, a certain length of service. That's persona 1. And then addressing the needs, interests, concerns and expectations across those personas, because one size fits all doesn't work. And I think that's the one thing that we've all started to witness. Yeah.
I really like what you're saying, because often it's like, oh, we have an issue, let's stick a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah, correct.
But the way that you're describing it is it's really integrated in how the whole company functions when you're looking at somebody's expectations for their roles or any concerns or needs that they have. And again, linking to what Martin said, meeting where people are at. And making sure that, the whole workplace is designed in a way that you can do that. Yeah,
agreed. And not only the workplace, the work itself, and also the social constructs within that organisation, really looking holistically. I think one of the things that I harp on about, which my team always point out, is, James, you say, you know, HR is not the only place that well-being should sit, right? If you've got a white-collar workforce, the majority of their time is going to be at a computer. Where do the majority of well-being issues come from? The fact that the Wi-Fi is not very good, or the laptop isn't ergonomic, and it creates physical issues that then can create psychological. The fact that I can't connect to a Teams meeting, or I've got back-to-back Teams meetings, that's all the role of technology. And typically those types of functions don't have a seat at the table when it comes to looking at what are the root causes of poor well-being within an organisation. And that approach of having sort of non-siloed group of experts from within your own business that understands your business, some of the things that that workers are going to struggle with, is the other thing that needs to go with the nicer assessment. It can't just be sat in the HR space.
No, it really needs to be owned by the whole company.
Correct, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And Marta, is there anything that you'd like to add to this question?
Yes, I mean, I resonate with what you both are saying. I think we were also talking earlier a little bit below we started about how also generations can have different impacts on what different employees' needs, and how we are seeing indeed more and more that this personalized, targeted approach to HR programs is going to be more the norm. So I guess that's also for the second part of the conversation when we are talking more about trends and the future and so on. But we were saying earlier that now we see more generations sort of collaborating together in the workforce than before. We also see, of course, that well-being is talked about more than ever. We see that organizations are taking on initiatives, but a lot of it is still very reactive. And there is a bit of a disconnect between what the companies are trying to do, how people are feeling. I think approaching it as that 360 intervention that we were mentioning is really the way forward. And of course, easier said than done. So we will dive into, I hope, a little bit into how we can do that.
And then, Marta, I'm curious, is there any project that you were once a part of, whether it be at OpenUp or maybe before, that you really saw that it made an impact on people's well-being and overall in the company after having implemented it?
Sure. I mean, I think the key there is low barrier. And of course, it all depends on the organization, the situation, the growth stage, how global it is, and so on. I think something that we did at OpenUp that I am very proud of and that I hope everyone enjoyed as well had to do with the young leaders training. So really providing a training for the whole organization based on positive psychology and how to draw from positive emotions, how to increase resilience. Of course, that is not to say that people should withstand a 16-hour workday, but it's more to build resilience in this sort of chaotic time that we live in, also from a personal perspective, always a lot of things going on in the world. And I think, developing that common vocabulary within an organization, that sort of common culture of where we would like to go. And of course, the impact of these initiatives is always a little bit more long-term. This is something that we did this year, so I'm also really looking forward to see how we take it forward, how our leaders take it forward, and so on.
Well, I could vouch for the young leaders training. I was a part of it, so indeed, it was very, very impactful, and thank you for sharing. If it's okay, I'd like to move on to the next question, and that is, what challenges did you face when trying to embed employee well-being in the company culture, and how did you overcome these challenges? I'm just putting it in the open. Is there anybody who would want to take this question?
I'll grab that one if you want me to.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
so I think there are a couple of barriers. Some of our recent research has shown that sort of 87% of CEOs or C-suite level globally, and it's 83 in the UK if you split it out, said that sort of well-being is increasing. We feel that actually our workforce is becoming more thriving, which is what we define well-being as. It's the ability to thrive. Whereas actually when you take a spin back to the other side of the coin, to the workforce, actually 75% say, well, we think actually it's not. It's either plateaued or we're now starting to sort of see a decrease in well-being. And I think one of the barriers is very much the C-suite or the company directors are going, we're making all of this investment, we're doing all of this stuff. We are starting to really change the way that we embed well-being within our organisation. However, only then 1 or 2% of those organisations actually measure the impact. So It's based on assumptions, right? It's based on we've provided a load of benefits, a load of support, a load of things that people can do. Therefore, we assume, based on a small number of data points, that actually well-being is increasing. You go to the employees and it's like, well, actually the culture here is really challenging. I've got a heavy workload. We're in a really economically unsound situation. The cost of living is increasing. Yes, the company is providing all of this stuff, but actually I've not got the time to access that because I've got a huge workload or I'm worried about work. So I think that those challenges of the disconnect between leaders and what leaders think is happening and what employees are experiencing is one of the particular causes. The second is that measurement piece. If you treasure it, measure it, right? Like, we don't have other parts of a business, financial functions, for example, that don't measure success. I think if you walked into any CFO office and said, how are we tracking? They go, well, we're assuming we're okay. It wouldn't go down well with shareholders and stakeholders, right? Why are we in the same place with well-being or that ability to thrive, the individual's ability to thrive would be my view. I think they're two of the fundamental causes of cultural issues within an organisation.
Yes, I think this is also linking back to what we said before, that sometimes we just think that we're offering things, maybe even sticking those band-aids on certain challenges, and that therefore we assume it must be helping the mental well-being or the well-being in general of people. But yeah, there can be quite a discrepancy there if we don't measure the return on investment, right, of what
Agreed.
We're doing. Yeah.
And it's almost like, well, if you're not mesuring, how do you know it's working?
Exactly.
And how do you know if culturally it's going to make a difference? And if you're not measuring, you've not got the information you need to know whether or not it's making a difference, right? And one of the biggest impacts we have is when we sit down with C-suite leaders and go, right, well, here's some empirical evidence, right? It's not just a fluffy, void thing that well-being is happiness. It's actually a thing. So Oxford University, the Wellbeing Research Institute partnered with Indeed. Indeed, the jobs platform, everybody should, I think, know Indeed. If you don't, go and have a look. It's the world's largest organisational wellbeing assessment. It happens with every organisation that's on the Indeed platform. When you take the top 100 performing companies from that portfolio, you measure them against the NASDAQ, the Dow Jones, other investment platforms. Those top 100 organisations outperform financially by 30%. Where there's turmoil in the markets, they're far more resilient. Where there's growth in the market, the growth is accelerated far quicker. And when there's a decline, the decline is far less. When you compare the return on investment of those that are not performing, those well-performing organisations are 300% better off. So there's real tangible empirical evidence that says focusing on this will drive value for money for you and your shareholders and stockholders, but also you're doing it for the right reason, which is to create a workplace where people can thrive.
Exactly, and that you're going to see that back in the company's results. And I'm just looking on how to make this concrete for the listeners. How can they measure this within their companies, the return on investment of initiatives that they've set up regarding the well-being? I don't know, Marta, if you have any ideas on this, or...
Well, I think the easiest is ask your people, right? And we talk a lot about engagement surveys, pulse checks, but it is really important to do those in a consistent way, and to also indeed look at the trends, look at the data over time. Have you launched any particular initiative in a certain period of time? What impact has that had in your results? But also indeed have that dialogue. What do people expect and need? And going a bit back to what you were saying, James, because indeed often we find this sort of pool of resources available that doesn't really address the root causes. So indeed having that continuous dialogue, also and not only on the data, but also on that level of having a meaningful conversation, train your leaders to be able to have that conversation, to go a bit deeper, to really understand how the different aspects of work are impacting the employees.
Thank you for sharing that. And Martin, I'm going to include you in the conversation as well as you're joining online. What are the challenges that you've seen within Arcadis regarding setting up initiatives and making well-being more of a priority within the organization?
So I think for us, well-being has always been one of our kind of real key cultural aspects and one of the key values at Arcadis. And certainly I've seen a shift in it as we've moved away from more presenteeism in the office to more of a hybrid model where people are spending less time in the office. So I think that the contrast is quite interesting. For me, I experienced support from Arcadis. I had a particularly bad burnout a number of years ago. It's a very difficult time. It's a very difficult thing to kind of go through. I've spoken openly about it in the organisation because that kind of being comfortable to talk about it within an organisation and feeling supported is really, really important. And I felt that. So I think employee assistance programs, when they're set up correctly, they can, as James, as you said, you can throw things at people, right? Here's an employee assistance program. Go and use it. Okay, what does that actually mean? Because it's a very isolating experience when you're going through it. So having it landed properly and not just throwing things. So here's a wellbeing app is another one that I see a lot of organisations do. Okay, well, how do I use a wellbeing app? I don't know what that is. You might do, you might not. So I really kind of struck a chord with you on that sort of throwing things at people, because I think what we did very well as an organisation was land it with people, was make it acceptable to talk about it, was make it a kind of an open discussion point. So I think that is a challenge that gets broken down. I see that in other organisations when I talk to other people, that they don't have that culture where openness is really kind of respected and seen as important. So I think that's one thing to kind of overcome. I think as we've moved more to sort of a hybrid model, that has changed things quite significantly. That in connectivity that you would have with your manager, has perhaps disappeared a little bit. It's moved more onto a virtual environment. People can find that a bit more daunting to actually sit on a call, a Teams call or something like that and start talking about personal problems. You haven't got that, the body language that goes with it and that proximity to somebody who is caring. And I think, again, the challenges that we saw early in our move away from, in office to a more of a hybrid model was, again, and thank you for setting this one perfectly as well, James. You've done it twice there now. Is that integrating functions? Okay, so if HR does it on its own, if workplace does it on its own, if tech does it on its own, it just doesn't work. Okay, that cross-function connectivity that brings people together to talk about, okay, what problem are we trying to solve? This is not rocket science business, right? But too often you see these functions operating in isolation. Tech launches something there, go and do it. HR says to their people, right, go and do this. Workplace goes and creates an environment and says, oh, isn't that environment wonderful? If you're not then taking people through that journey on how do you actually use that environment more effectively, how do you use that wellbeing assistance program more effectively, I think that it's not going to be successful. I don't necessarily think it's so strong to say it's going to fail, because I think having any form of assistance program in place around wellbeing is going to provide some support, but there's a strong difference between it being okay and being a huge success. And I think it's something that we landed very, very well in our organisation and I think continue to do so. So, yeah, I think there's lots of challenges around it, but you can overcome them, but it isn't done in isolation and in silos. And it's not all down to HR is where I would position it. It's definitely not just a HR issue.
Yeah, so again, really integrating all the different functions and coming back to what you shared earlier, when employees are already in a state of overwhelm, just throwing solutions at them, that isn't going to add to the overwhelm that they're having because it's already too much. So really to have those
Absolutely. I think, as you said, a 16-hour day, and then you get, oh, by the way, here's an extra training course for you to do on wellbeing. It's just like, do you really not know what I've just done? And our CEO was really quite powerful around this. As we moved to a global organisation, everyone was working, because we really globalised our business and moved away from country leadership to a global model. Working days became longer and longer. We're working from Asia right through to a US time zone. So our CEO was very strong in saying, okay, it's acceptable in our company to say I'm not working outside 8 until 6, okay, if you don't want to. So for those in global roles, it was becoming the norm to do these ridiculously long days, right? So there was a message from the top. It is okay to say, no, I'm not doing that on that day. I'm time shifting, so I do US one day, I do Asia another day. But I think it's that point where you've got those elongated days to then just throw something and go, oh, by the way, invest an extra hour in your well-being today.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do it, and everyone's like, thanks. That's just what I wanted to do in the spare hour that I've got, is go and do another training course. I'm not doing it, so yeah.
It's the opposite, right? Actually, you end up with losing talent because you're paying lip service to it. You're starting to go, here's a load of plasters. We call it bikes, bananas, yoga and cake, right? They're the things that people see well-being as, but actually the less you talk about well-being, the more likely you are to achieve it, right? Because you're actually then addressing the root causes behind things rather than the cycle to work schemes, the yoga, which do all have their place, but do not solve the problem.
No. And I think that also links to what Martin was saying, also you being vulnerable about your own experience and opening up about it to lower the barrier. What you were saying, Marta, that's so important regarding mental well-being and mental health, that we lower that barrier and make it easier to talk about these things, even if we're working in more of a hybrid environment where that can be more challenging.
Martin, I'd be interested to know if there are some other leaders, which I assume there are in your organisation, that have started to share that. Has that acted as it's a bit of a setup question, apologies. Has that acted as a little bit of a catalyst, do you think? And has that accelerated cultural change?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I came from part of the organisation that was acquired by Arcadis, and it was a professional services firm. It was quite macho in its approach. It was very much, you kind of need to get on with these things. but you could see visibly there was people with were just falling apart. Okay, it's a pressure environment as the business started to grow. As some of us started, and there was, you know, surprisingly, once people started talking about it, more and more people actually started putting their hand up and going, do you know what, I'm actually struggling. And when I first did my share, it was about, I don't know, let's say probably four or 5 years ago. The number of calls I kind of got from colleagues afterwards to say, I never realised, number one, and then number two, you know, what happened. And I was quite happy to talk about, you know, what were the symptoms, what caused it. The kind of recovery period afterwards is a long time. It's not something that you suddenly go, okay, I've been through a burnout, I'm back to work, everything's fine. And interestingly, one of our really senior leaders is doing a webinar tomorrow, and it's entitled My Burnout and My Recovery, which again is going to the 38,000 people that we employ. Everybody can log on and listen to him talk about that. And, you know, and to me, it's those kind of activities and being really that open and comfortable. And not everyone is, and you've got to be at the right stage in your kind of recovery to talk about it. But that openness in Arcadis is really quite prevalent, and it's got to start at the top. It's got to be one of our senior leaders saying, do you know what, this happened. It's not the end of the world. It's not a stigma that goes with it. And that's where I think mental health has developed so significantly in the workplace, certainly in our organisation, is that, you know, it's okay to talk about it, and it's not seen as a negative and a barrier to your career, which is where perhaps in some cultures it's that person has failed. Certainly for me, it was not a failure. It was a massive learning experience that's going to help me develop.
What an amazing way to reframe a very difficult experience. And it sounds like it's really leading by example that is being that catalyst for change. So thank you for sharing that. I want to move on to the next question, if that's okay. So the next question is, and I'm going to give a little bit of context to this question as well. So how do you motivate and engage managers and team leads to make mental well-being a priority? So the context is, so for them not just to see it as a topic that needs to be addressed because they're told to have, you know, that monthly meeting regarding mental well-being, but to really motivate them to actively support and promote well-being initiatives for their employees. Marta, would you be okay taking that question?
Yes, of course. So, I mean, I think with most things, it starts with themselves, right? I think there was a study a few months ago saying that most people say that their managers have a great impact in their mental well-being, almost as much as their partners and so on. I don't remember the exact number, but it was quite significant. And I think it starts with that self-reflection as a manager. You know, how is my manager impacting me? How am I impacting my team? And of course, also creating that safe space for the managers to be vulnerable, for the managers to also express when they are having a challenge, also creating that sort of team that supports each other, where they are not necessarily feeling alone in their leadership journey. So I think, of course, you can have HR, you know, saying, okay, you have to do this, you have to do that, this is your deadline, this is why. Of course, the why and repeating the why is very important. But I think it starts with creating that experience and that environment for themselves. And that's how it's then really helps to lead by example and cascade it throughout the organization.
Indeed, also that kind of leading by example, that as a manager, you also have a manager, and how is that manager helping you to open up that space so
Exactly.
that you're also learning how to do that to your own team and to create that space as well.
Exactly. And sometimes it's a tricky balance, right? Because you also don't want to sort of put all your negativity and all your doubts or your challenges with your team. So sometimes I think that is even more the hardest part. It's not necessarily to be open, but it's to find that balance so that you don't sort of pass on the stress.
Yeah, don't cause them too much worry, but can also be vulnerable when, you're not feeling yourself or there might be things going on.
Exactly. And I think that's where the self-awareness also is very important because then when you learn to recognize your own emotions, your own stress, I think you are also able to categorize it a little bit better. Okay, is this something that, so today something happened and, tomorrow is going to be better? Or is it more of a structural thing that maybe requires a different type of intervention from my side? And then I think, indeed, knowing yourself really helps to then knowing how to navigate that with your team.
Yeah. So really creating that space as well for managers to self-reflect, to understand their stress, and to help them then, help others with that as well.
Yeah, indeed.
I can see that you're wanting to answer
No,
this.
I think I'm getting defensive sat here in front of a room full of psychologists. Apologies.
No worries.
I think the thing that I struggle to comprehend with that, I think, and I like to play devil's advocate every so often, so apologies.
Please go, yes.
I think where you have, and perhaps floating back to the different generations, right? So we've now got 5 generations generally in the workforce. Majority, 75%, are sort of millennials and Gen Zs. You've got baby boomers and the silent generation in perhaps more senior roles. Those generations, typically, sweeping generalisation, so massive disclaimer there, typically perhaps aren't able to promote those types of behaviours, leadership, opening up, being vulnerable. And the challenge we see in a lot of our clients is, to Martin's point about people, sort of middle leaders starting to accelerate that curve of opening up and developing, you end up with a series of mini curves of activity, which then gets stifled at that senior level, because it's very much, well, I can see that this is a thing. I'm perhaps not self-aware enough to be able to reflect on that and see this as the opening up of a moment where we can sustain change, which results in actually the continuation of those mini culture activations, with the workforce then start to get a little bit more demotivated. So, and that is a bit contradictory to perhaps what we're talking about here, right? Because if we're saying that, yes, people leave managers, not the business, those managers keep opening up and sharing and being vulnerable, but the senior leadership in the business isn't accepting of that, or isn't sort of realising that's what's happening, we've got a cultural problem, and I'm not sure the individual, want to be part of a business where that's the case. And typically those types of decisions are being made by the Gen Zs, Gen Is of the world that are very, very new in the workforce. Is the only challenge I think I'd put to that.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that targeting the middle management would be another way of approaching this challenge, because you see them as kind of the connectors between the more seniors and the younger people in the company.
I think so, but until you actually get the senior buy-in, the change of culture at that senior level, that acceleration of change is never going to happen. You're always going to end up, if you're on a spectrum of 1 is ill-being, 5 is well-being, you're always going to end up at that 3. You're never going to be able to get past 3 because senior leadership haven't bought into it, aren't self-aware enough. Yeah.
And besides the data that you've been sharing with senior leadership to get them to understand the impact that mental well-being can have, what are other ways that you have or have seen others try to get that senior buy-in on the importance of looking at mental well-being in the company?
So we've seen some very, very personal, distressing stories shared from, and I also need to sort of disclose this as, like, a lot of the stuff we're talking about could be seen as white collar workforce versus blue collar workforce, right? And we're talking a lot about psychological safety here, but also there's the physical element of it, right? And typically those two things are interlinked. You can't have a physical issue without having some form of psychological reaction to that, and a psychological issue without some form of physical reaction to it. So one of the things that we've seen is story sharing of what's happening on the front line in sort of blue-collar workforce world, where perhaps cost of living is really adversely impacting them. The fact that families can't buy quality produce to be able to feed themselves. The fact that some will have to go to food banks to go and be able just to live and survive rather than thrive. The fact that some of the workforce or contracted workforce are having serious injuries and fatalities through the activities of the organisation, and starting to share some of those more hard-hitting sort of bits of information through a leadership coaching programme, 360 almost, external in as well as bottom up, then starts to change some of the mindset, because leaders that can then go, well, actually, it's not just a psychological thing, it is actually a physical thing, a thing that I can see and experience happening within my organisation.
Wow, so it's really bringing all the different stories that there are to life and to the forefront, to also lower that barrier again in understanding.
Completely.
And urgency.
And that storytelling is so important, right?
Yeah.
Because within all of our cultures, we've grown up with stories, from nursery rhymes to everything else. And that's how we start to relive some of our experience and sort of relate to some of the things we're being told.
Exactly. And I think that's also so important when we're talking about mental well-being, that connection that we can have together, that we can all struggle with the same things or different things, but still experience the same emotions, is really important. That, storytelling can play a really important role in. And moving on to the next question. What is your vision for how HR and employee well-being will evolve in 2024 and beyond? What trends should HR professionals be watching? And I'm going to give this question to Martin.
Thank you. A nice easy one to follow on from the manager's bit. I mean, I think for me, when we look at it from a workplace perspective, it's so significant in terms of enhancing productivity. You know, as you talked about ill-being to well-being, when you have people at the high end of the spectrum, happy people function better. It doesn't necessarily mean you go and measure productivity, but the happiness factor and the mental, particularly mental and physical well-being, will obviously have a huge impact on business performance. So for us, as we move into the next element of the strategy cycle, it's fundamental. I think there's two things that we'll probably look at, and what will be important is, as we normalise hybrid working, that virtual connectivity with the organisation and how you drive well-being off the back of that is really, really important. And I think there's technology and intelligent solutions that are coming on that we need to follow and kind of work out how do they actually impact and work in the business. Because I think, to your point on the kind of storytelling piece, we've certainly seen quite a lot of personal stories that are shared at the start of meetings. So there's a comfortable dialogue around something that somebody's done. You know, how do you amplify that? How do you take that to the next stage? How do you create we've done a really amazing session around inclusivity using VR headsets to really give people an immersive experience around what it's like to feel excluded. So again, you could perhaps amplify that towards, you know, what does it feel when you're going through that experience of ill-being, and really kind of take that forward. So I think that's really important. And then I think the other one in terms of the physical environments is moving our people away from we have a wellness room, so therefore that's a big kind of thumbs up. So I've just done a few trips to different countries to look at how some of their offices are set up before we transform them. And I went into one wellness room, and I knew it was the wellness room because on the door it said wellness room. Okay? So I was really excited to kind of go into this wellness room, and it was just a white store cupboard that had all the furniture cleared out, and there was a yoga mat in the corner. And it was probably, I've never felt so ill at work ever. It was such an inspiring and dreadful place that it would literally be like that. If you're having a bad day, that is the last place you would go. No windows, high kind of lighting levels, white with your yoga mat, right? So I think for us, it's not just about saying, well, I've created a wellness room, I've got a decompression space. It's then actually moving that forward as a priority to say, okay, if you are going to create a space, A, make it the right space or don't bother. And B, then, you know, take people on that journey of how do you use the space effectively? What does it actually mean? Because just creating a box that says wellness on the front isn't going to drive that in your physical environment. So
So different things, using technology to really amplify the well-being trends, being deliberate about the spaces that we use. But I'm also hearing a little bit of having kind of like a change plan for whatever kind of initiative that you're setting up, really taking people in the why and the how and the what.
Absolutely. I think without anything that we do, if there isn't a robust change program that sits behind it, then it's just, to me, it's not worth doing. If you're not going to invest in the change piece that goes to something that, you know, as you were talking about, fundamentally changes that culture. So it is driven from the top. If the leaders aren't taken through that change journey, and it's just give them a video and play this at the start of a meeting and everything will be okay, that just isn't going to land it in an organisation. It's got to be taken through that change program, absolutely.
And James, what do you have to add for the trends to be watching for HR and well-being in the coming years?
So I think we're on the cusp of a well-being revolution, let's call it that. So I think well-being 1.0 was very much sort of siloed, reactive. Here it's soft and fluffy, it's sort of unmeasurable. Here are some things for you to go and fix yourself. I think that's sort of, we're right at the border of that. And it's almost like we're on a trek to Everest base camp. We're at base camp. We now need to climb the rest of Everest to get to that sort of nirvana state, where it is proactive, right? We're perhaps taking less. We're providing less. We're taking more away. We're not having back-to-back meetings if you're white collar workforce. We are trying to address your fundamental needs, interests, concerns, and expectations if you're blue collar workforce. We are across business service line that has all of the key players, that breaks down silos. We're not talking about diversity and inclusion separately to well-being, separately to safety, separately to, because all of those things pull together to create a sense of belonging, which is the number one driver of well-being and the number one driver of feeling included. So it's really stripping it back and actually going, what are the things we're trying to do? It's very much address root causes. I think the second thing, and I wouldn't be sat in a sustainability team if I didn't say it, if you're looking for an activation route, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, bear with me, is now active. There is a requirement for businesses to look at their own workforce and disclose a whole load of information. We're talking about the material topics to the workforce, i.e. the needs, interests, concerns and expectations. Businesses by 2025 are going to have to start disclosing in their public reports what they're doing in this space. So if you're not able to start the journey, regulation is always a great stick to be able to be like, well, actually, we're going to have to do it. So it sort of deals with the naysayers around actually what are we going to do. I think that's the other thing we're going to start to see is that sort of broadening out of other regulations to help drive forward a people-first approach, which then impacts positively on profits.
Amazing, thank you. And Marta, any final thoughts on key trends that you're excited about in the coming years?
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, everything that has been said, but I would say, for me, I think one of the biggest trends that we're seeing in HR, not only in well-being, but more in general, is indeed personalization and really targeting and creating these personas that we were talking at the beginning. So I think when it comes to well-being, as you say, as part of the whole inclusion, diversity, etc. agenda, we're also going to have to see that sort of personalization in the different initiatives that come up. Of course, I also think the next year or the next 2 years is still in transition. We are still in this, at the verge of this cusp, if you say. And these are difficult topics also in society. So I think we are having these challenges within private, public organizations, no matter the type of institution. But it's definitely a societal conversation that we will not, let's say, have figured out in the next year. But I think the fact that we are having here this conversation, that it's more at the forefront of the talk, already indicates a little bit it will normalize at some points in the next few years. And so we're here to see it. So, yeah.
As a psychologist, making me very excited. I do want to round off this part of our session. So thank you very much for your answer so far, because we have quite some questions coming in through the chat. Just as a side note, I'm going to do my best to cover all the questions, but there is a chance that, we might dive a little bit more in certain questions, so we might get round to all of them. But to start with the first question coming in, so Desiree asks, what are good key performance indicators within organizations for measuring well-being? James, would you mind answering that question?
Great. I thought I was going to get voluntold to do that one. So listen, I think there are a few things. I think, first of all, you need to take a step back before you go to measuring to make sure that you've got a clear definition of what well-being is within your organisation. Because if you talk to 50 people about what is well-being, you'll get 50 different interpretations of what it is, from a spectrum of an individual fixing themselves to the organisation being able to create a place where people can thrive. I think that's the first crucial step. The second is to look across what we were talking about, the persona thing, right? Because unless you understand your workforce and how it is constructed, providing things will be immeasurable, because you don't know what the things are addressing and who it's supposed to be helping. So number two is having a really clear understanding of who it is, the handful of personas. I think once you've done that and you understand the needs, interests, concerns and expectations, you can go, well, actually, it becomes a little bit easier because you know who the people are, you know their needs, interests, concerns and expectations. You can go, well, actually, this thing deals with that persona group. So the things you can then start to look at sort of uptake of that thing that you've provided. Is it flexible working? Is it leadership coaching? Is it some of the yoga and cake stuff that we talked about earlier on? You can then take one deeper, which is, and how is it impacting you? So is it a positive experience? Is it a negative experience? So yes, that is a little bit subjective, but you can then start to back that up over a longer term with some of the other stats around voluntary attrition, around productivity. You can start to use some of the technology. If you've all got Microsoft Teams, Viva Engage within Microsoft Teams tells you first log on, last log off. How long are people working? So you can start to take a look at actually how many back-to-back meetings people have. Do they take some breaks in between? Do we need to set up some rules and constructs to be able to change that and then measure those things? So I would say it's less around sort of what are the headline well-being KPIs that exist within an organisation. I think it's more around who are the people, what are you trying to address, what have you provided, and are those things working, yes or no?
Thank you. So it's a lot more than just the key performance indicators, but really starting by why am I even wanting to address this? What are the ways of doing it?
Agreed. Yeah. And if you want some KPIs, take a look at the Indeed website. If you look at any large multinational on the Indeed website, it gives you the questions that are asked. It tells you the four categories, the overall wellbeing performance score. And if you want the methodology that sits behind that, Jan Emmanuel Deneuve from Oxford will love me for saying this. There's a pitch for him. Go and have a look at the Oxford Wellbeing Research Institute website, because it will give you the how to do it as well. All of the questions, all of the methodology and how to do the scoring.
I think that's a great tip for the people who are listening. And I have a question that's kind of following up on this. I'm going to give it to you again, James, if that's okay.
Fine.
Because Jesper asks, as you have such different personas within an organization, how do you make sure you reach the right persona within the right solutions you are offering? So who really needs to be involved in the organization to make this work?
So I would take the last bit, who really needs to be involved, as what business units, and I would effectively say everybody, right? You need everybody at the table to be able to understand the business. When it comes to actually creating the personas, it is a little bit of trial and error to begin with, because it's such a new concept for businesses with people. It's really not a new concept for social media outlets, right, as well, because they do that. That's how TikTok targets the types of things. It's how Amazon targets selling you similar products to somebody who bought something that you're looking at now. I think to try and wheedle down those personas is really challenging. You need to, for want of a better term, go to an 80-20, 60-40 rule, where if you've got the majority of needs, interests, concerns and expectations, and you've got a few things that perhaps don't fit, or it's a struggle to shoehorn them in to increase the number, don't go for perfection. Just go for the as is, because at least you've got a group of people together, and it will be at a high enough level. It's almost like, in that instance, perfection is going to be the driver of failure rather than the driver of success. Yeah, that would be my take on it. I mean, I don't know if you've done any work on personas, Marta, if you've got a view on that as well. Sorry to also throw you a grenade.
No, that's all right. Well, I think that, of course, depends a lot also on the size and the growth stage of the organization. Like, I think also in the last few years, I've worked mostly at a startup/a scale-up. And I think what you're saying essentially is the best tip in this type of organization, which is start small. Rather start small than spend 2 years working to make it perfect. And then by the time you want to launch it, then the company is a completely different time. So I think, if you're a small company, starting with basically employee net promoter score, and see how that takes you across the different departments, etc. It's a great way to start defining what are going to be the personas. So go from the data into the groups and not the other way around.
I think that can be such a common pitfall, right? We have to have like a great plan in stake, and everybody has to give sign off, and it all has to be, and that can take so long, when even small tweaks and small changes can already be of great impact. So thank you for adding that as well. I'm going to have a next question. I'm going to give this one to you, Martin. So Rosalie asks, how do you create a culture where health becomes a normal topic of discussion?
I think it's what I talked about earlier, and what James talked around as well, which is openness and talking about it. To land a lot of our kind of, we put health and safety because of the industries that we work in, oil and gas and construction, health and safety is really important. So some years ago, we started off every meeting that we have at Arcadis, whether it's internal or client facing, starts with a health and safety moment where you talk about a safety issue. Over the years, that's evolved now to talk around values moments, around inclusion. We talk around, we'll do health and safety on well-being, on health. And that's not just mental health, that's physical health, and people sharing stories around what they've done to improve, diet, exercise regimes. Leads to quite a few humble brags, actually. That's one of the downsides of it. You'll get a lot of people who are like, well, I was really busy this morning at my 5 a.m. run. But it's all good. It's the culture of talking about it and talking about it regularly. So Mental Health Awareness Day, it's time to talk. Most organisations will do something around the specific day, okay, and then you put it back on the shelf, and then you roll it out again next year, and you go, look, it's Mental Health Awareness Day. Personally, because I've suffered with mental health problems, that's the day I don't talk about it, okay, because everybody's talking about it on a forced thing. And look, it's good for raising publicity. But for me, it's about talking about it all the time. So it's about feeling comfortable to say to your colleagues, you okay? How you getting on? And I think it's it is that leadership thing, okay? It comes right from the very top. Everyone in our organisation talks about it openly, starts the dialogue, and that really starts it then to become the norm. And it's not something special on a special day. It's just talked about health and well-being all the time.
So it's really about consciously and deliberately, wherever you can, making space to make this a topic of discussion. Yeah, and not just...
I just think these things, it's important at the start of any program to kind of force it, right? But if you keep forcing it, then it's not landing. If there's a reason to keep needing to force things, then you've got to go back and look at, are we approaching this in the right way? Because once it stops being forced, then you start to see kind of measurable benefits from it, because people are open to talk about it and talk about it a lot more. Not everyone will, some people have got different mindsets on how open they are. But, I think if you see somebody else talking about it, it's going to help, even if you don't want to sit there and talk about your problems yourself.
Yeah, it can make you feel less lonely without even,
Absolutely.
I thought you wanted to say something, Marta.
Yeah, I think, of course, indeed, people with different experiences, backgrounds, sometimes different cultures, like not everyone will have the same threshold when it comes to opening up. But I think sometimes just knowing that you can already makes a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that. I'm going to go on to the next question. Rosalie asks again, you argue that you have to look at the cause of the problem, but I think the causes of, for example, burnout often lie in the private lives of colleagues, not just work. How should you deal with that as an employer? I'm throwing it in the open. Who wants to take this question?
I mean, I can
go ahead.
add something to that. I mean, certainly my burnout was caused by a combination of factors, right? So I think I'm not a psychologist. It's not one thing, okay? A burnout for me, was a realization that over time your bandwidth gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then you just can't cope with even the slightest thing, right? So I think personal life is a significant impact. Certainly mine was a significant impact on me. Adding work, adding children, adding life in general, the whole thing comes kind of crashing down. So I think we've invested in programs around mental health awareness training. And I think, again, there is a lot to be said to be able to say as an employer, to say to your people, are you okay? Okay. And again, giving them that psychological safety, that if it's not a work-related issue, if they feel comfortable talking about it, that they can. And also through our employee assistance programs that we run, that's not just for work. Okay, so we've used it. I know of people in the organisation, they've talked to me about it. They've talked about personal problems, cost of living problems, family problems with their kids. You know, the whole thing. So as an employer, I think you can have the dialogue, but having that assistance program where somebody knows that they can go somewhere can help towards that personal life issue as well. You know, our program is not, and we encourage people, it's not just to talk about workplace stress, because let's face it, often the stress that is existing outside of work that is far, far in excess of what you face day to day in your job.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think really important to emphasize that it's multiple things that can influence how we're feeling. James?
Can I jump in?
Of course.
Because I think I'm going to say something that's slightly contentious, which is, and I'm going to say two things. One is, we also need to be mindful that it's not the organisation's responsibility to make you better. It is the organisation's responsibility to not make things worse. I think there's a key differentiator there that we all need to be completely crystal clear on. And then I think that the second part, which Martin you've put very, very nicely, is people are one thing. Like there is no such thing as like outside of work, inside of work, with friends, without friends. We are one person. And we really need to be mindful with that. You know, people will typically take 40% of their personal problems into work with them in the morning, and they'll typically take 40% of their work problems at home. Everybody has a bucket. It has so much that it can hold. If you've got all these different taps going on, you need to look at that picture holistically. And Martin, I think you're 100% right. That psychological safety to be able to say, actually, I do have a problem at home, enables the business to then go, right, well, let's then dial back some of the things in work that could be causing your bucket to fill up quicker and overflow or break.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to slowly close our conversation in this. And I think it's an important takeaway. We bring our whole selves to work. And let's keep that in mind also in our discussions on mental well-being. Because we've come to the end of our conversation, time does fly. Thank you, Marta, James, and Martin, for sharing your insights and also your personal experiences with us. I definitely learned a lot. I hope our listeners did too. And a big thank you, of course, to our listeners for being here, for asking your questions and listening in. Our second session of the HR Summit is taking place tomorrow. It's about the human aspect of artificial intelligence, understanding its impact on employee well-being. And please know that at OpenUp, we are always happy to talk about your mental well-being in the workplace. If you want to know more about OpenUp, you can go to openup.com and find more information there. So that's it for now. A big thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.